I mean, if you want to lobby the state, you practically have to have a lobbyist. When you want to lobby the city government, you literally just show up to city council, or you sit down at your computer and bang out an email to your local elected officials.
Unfortunately, so many people don't really know what a city manager does, don't even know the name of their local city manager.
It does not have to be political and divisive. It can be true public service. You're bringing your people together, your neighborhood together to connect with one another, to know who, may be vulnerable in their neighborhood.
Welcome to Parish, a video podcast that celebrates, equips, and focuses on small churches and why they matter so much. We believe small churches are uniquely positioned to integrate in their communities and engage issues in ways only small churches can. I'm your host, Canaan Hurst, and this is episode 15, the Untapped Resource of Local Government.
Today, we have Shawn Lewis on the podcast, who is the city manager of the city of Englewood. You also just were named the City Manager of the Year in 2021 by the Colorado City and County Manager Association, which is a huge honor. So congratulations for that.
Thank you.
And I wanted to say, just for anyone listening, that we wanted to bring Shawn on because our last episode that was about political engagement was kind of setting a theological and biblical precedent for engaging civically. And so I really wanted to bring you on as someone who does this full time for a living, to tell us some really practical ways that small churches can engage and kind of the issues that you deal with day to day. So we'll talk about your journey in local government and politics, how you got where you are today, and why you're in the city of Englewood.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And I think that for me, it started with really just, growing up, watching my dad. He ran for sheriff when I was in junior high and served in that role, a bunch of other roles in county government back in Texas. And my mom was a school teacher, and she had done that pretty much since my third grade on. She kind of went back to work and did that. So I think public service was kind of in my blood. When I was in college, I went to Lubbock Christian University, ran for student body president, and got that. And I think that also was really an important part of making me realize you can have a lot of positive impact in positions of leadership where you're guiding organizations and you're guiding a group of people who are dedicated to making things better. So when I graduated from grad school out at Pepperdine, I ended up getting my first job as a management assistant to the city manager, which is basically one step above an intern. But I've really kind of worked my way up through departments and doing different things in city government. And back in 2019, was named the city manager of Englewood.
That's awesome. And it's been different cities, kind of your whole journey, right? Before Englewood, you were in Longmont?
Longmont, right. Yep. I was assistant city manager for 6 years in Longmont. And it served in a variety of roles, mostly in Texas, actually, doing economic development, planning, and community development.
Awesome. Well, you're amazing at what you do. Those of us who are listening in Englewood know that about you. And even though you've started not too long ago, you've done some amazing things. And we'll get into that here in just a minute. But let's talk about kind of your responsibilities, because unfortunately, so many people in the world don't really know what a city manager does, don't even know the name of their local city manager. I mean, and that's really unfortunate. But I want to just kind of go through, for the sake of our neighbors, but also anyone listening, what do you do? And then how does that compare to other city governments in the country?
Yeah, well, I would say it's fortunate that people don't know their city manager because, it makes my job easier now. Well, I would say kind of the first answer to that question is that the city manager is the chief executive of the city as an organization. Certainly, city government has a very wide, span of influence from everything from water to sewer to fire fighting to, zoning and planning to policing. So all of those different departments feed into the city manager's office. And so I serve as the chief executive from that standpoint, but taking the direction from city council, who really sets the vision and the overall kind of direction that the city is going. And then I translate that into, action, working with the departments. They actually do the translating, but I make sure it gets translated into actionable steps that carry out the vision of city council. And the city manager does have a role in kind of the visioning for the community. And certainly council, I think, expects that from their city manager. And I enjoy doing some of that. But ultimately, it's really their role to do that, and we are implementing those policies, that vision, and putting it into action. The other thing in the council manager form of government that's interesting is that I'm really a bridge between the staff of the city that's doing the day-to-day operations and the politics. The city council they're elected, so they're by nature in a political realm, and I'm a bridge between that to make sure that per our charter, individual council members can't, direct a staff member to say, I don't like the way, you're maintaining my street, pave my street before all the others. I'm a bridge to make sure that the politics don't interfere with the day-to-day activities of the organization, which is how the council manager form of government is set up.
And that's pretty hard sometimes, and I'm sure kind of contentious.
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah. The way that the city of Englewood is set up, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a weak mayor system. Is that what it's called? So they're like strong and weak. Yeah, could you explain that?
Yeah, and that's really just a synonym for the council manager form of government.
Okay.
Weak
Gotcha.
mayor / council manager form of government. It just means that you have a city administrator that is really the chief executive of the organization, as opposed to like a Denver or a big city where the mayor is the chief executive and then the council is a legislative body. In the council manager form of government, the mayor and council are equally all equal and have one of 7 voices, giving policy direction and vision to the city administrator or city manager, who then is responsible for administering it.
Gotcha. What are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about your job, about city government in general, just kind of how things work? What have you come across where people just have it completely wrong, about what you do?
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception is that the city manager is all powerful, can make anything happen overnight. And certainly, I don't want to downplay the influence or the role of the city manager, but ultimately, I report to the city council. And so, while people can call me and say, "You need to fix this immediately," if I don't have a budget out of which to fix that, let's say it's a contractor working on something in their street and they don't like the way it's fixed. If I don't have a budget to come in and do repairs, I have to go to the city council, and the city council is looking for that. So I think that's a big misconception. And then also just, people don't understand the council manager form of government. And so a lot of people may call the mayor and say, I want this or that done, not realizing that he or she can't wave a magic wand and make that happen. It has to go through a process. He or she has to have, 4 votes on the council to make something change that then they can give direction to the city. So in some ways it's a little bit bureaucratic, but in many ways it's really safeguarded in terms of checks and balances, in terms of the power of any one individual. And we really have to work together as a staff and a council to make things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Like things work a little slower probably because of that, but it's a lot safer with those checks and balances put in place.
Right. And just make sure that all voices are heard as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the, I think anyone who's kind of taken any kind of peek into local government and seeing criticisms that are made and roadblocks and anyone who's dipped their toe in at all, they can see that there are lots of hardships that you and council and everyone else have to deal with. What are some of the biggest hurdles you have to jump over or that you've kind of run into since being city manager?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say the biggest hurdle a lot of times is just explaining things to the public. I think more than any other time in our history as a country, and perhaps certainly in the world, we have communication abilities and the ability to spread the word about something, frankly, for good or for bad. And so a lot of times when the city is working on a project or working on an initiative, there is the ability to, for people who are against it to get really behind being against it and rally the troops and get people to come, sometimes without really understanding, what the initiative or the program, the project is about. And so I would say one of our biggest challenges is getting the word out about those, the things that we're trying to do to make the city better. And ultimately, it's the council's decision. But I would say some of that really vitriolic, the dialogue around some of these issues, I think has been by far the most challenging thing, particularly for staff, because sometimes people aren't just against an idea, they make it personal and say, well, this person, this director of this department, is out to get us and doesn't have our best interests. And it can become pretty personal pretty fast.
Yeah, I feel like it's pretty common knowledge nowadays that, the loudest voices in the room are usually not the majority. And the majority are usually a lot calmer, have calmer heads and willing to entertain nuance and all sorts of things like that.
Definitely.
One thing I've heard lots of people say, city councilors, you and others mention things like, we don't have any positive public comment. It's almost always negative. Can you talk about that for a little bit? And maybe how a small church could engage in that better? Yeah.
Well, frankly, I think the Sacred Grace is a great example of how people can positively interact with their local government. I mean, I remember when I got here, there was a stack of welcome to Englewood. We're here, we're behind you. We're here to support you. And it was from members of Sacred Grace. And just such an encouragement. There have been other department heads and staff members who have received those. The pastor, Nathan, actually, I would say, he's not my pastor, but he has been very much a pastor to me, just checking in. How are you doing? I know y'all are going through this, rough patch, this difficult discussion. How are you doing? During the course of my time in Englewood, my parents died of COVID, and he was really there for me in terms of just making sure that, I was taking care of myself, that he just knew that, I knew that he was there. And then plus just, you have members of your congregation that are on council, that are, leaders in the Chamber of Commerce, that are really embedded into the community, bringing positive voices and bringing positive change as well. So I would say the Sacred Grace has been a great example of how to do it.
That's awesome to hear, and such a huge compliment. I'm so sorry to hear about your parents. COVID was and you don't have to get into COVID if you don't want to.
Oh, no, it's good.
But I was actually going to bring up, you didn't start very long before COVID. That was within your first year, right? Because you started in August of 19, is that correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So you get thrown into not only being the CEO, so to speak, of a city, but all of a sudden then you've got to be the one to communicate and figure out operations and systems to manage a city through a pandemic, the likes of which we haven't seen in 100 years.
Yeah.
Right? What was that like? And what kind of support did you get, or were you kind of wanting during that time?
Yeah, it has been a very unusual kind of start to a city manager's job so soon before a pandemic, but I was so proud of our team. And I would say the council was, in my ear saying, oh, what if we did this? What if we did that? So they were giving a lot of great direction, kind of informally to me. But, our organization being a little smaller, Englewood is not the largest city by any stretch in the Denver metro, but that ability to kind of shift on a dime. We had a number of economic development programs that we immediately shifted into business recovery grants. And just basically, before we even knew there was federal money coming, we were using local dollars to make sure that businesses could keep their doors open, to pay their staff, to not have to close permanently. On kind of the human side, we recognized very early on that there were seniors, there were people that were disabled, that were at home, that were trapped, that were vulnerable. And I actually think there were some people in the Sacred Grace that came alongside us with some of those programs, but we developed virtual calls to check in. We sent postcard mailers to people that we knew were in vulnerable populations to say, hey, we're going to do these check-in calls. We're also going to have people who are willing to come and help. We use a program called our Snow Buddies program that helped seniors and disabled folks shovel snow. We converted that into we'll buy you groceries. We'll help with that. So we were working along with some faith communities, some nonprofits to really make sure that we were taking care of people throughout that time. But really proud of our team who just shone brightly throughout that whole process.
That's so awesome. And you touched on a lot of kind of elements there where local government does and can take care of neighbors and through things, systems that are already in place or systems that can be changed, right? Even in a time like COVID, but now coming out of that time and in the, I don't want to say regular world, but in a time where a pandemic is not just at the forefront of everyone's minds, we're not in lockdown. How else do decisions made on a government level actually impact neighbors? Because, for this podcast is for small church leaders and members and people who are looking for kind of resources to engage. And oftentimes, even our the very few political conversations the church actually has oftentimes are just kind of the 30,000 foot view. But when we're talking about loving our neighbors, we don't often talk about direct action. And I don't know what else is more biblical than like direct action to loving our neighbors. So what are some other ways, especially like right now, that not only we can engage, but before we get into that, how do these decisions actually really impact neighbors, businesses, people in the community?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are tons of ways, that we interact with, regulate, license, businesses. I would say on the neighborhood side, your question reminds me actually in my first week or two, meeting with Nathan, and I said, man, it's just so divisive in this community. We were coming out of a time of really political strife on the council, between staff, between community members, staff, between council and staff. And so just a lot of division. And I said, what are your thoughts in terms of how to make this better? And he spoke through some of the things that the Sacred Grace was doing to improve on that. And I said, I really see an opportunity and a need to bring neighbors together. And I'm trying to think of how that would work. And he was like, well, here's how we kind of do it on a parish model. Englewood is our parish, but that's what we want to do as well. So we found some alignment. As that kind of developed, we ended up getting City Council to approve the Neighborhood Resources Program. And so that was a brand new program. We had never had anything like it. But what they have done in the last couple of years is create grants to have block parties where you're bringing your people together, your neighborhood together to connect with one another, to know who, may be vulnerable in their neighborhood. We created a block party trailer where you can rent this block party and it's got games and stuff. And that's another way to get people out. Backyard movie kits where you can invite your neighbors over for community. So we're really just trying to find ways of bringing people together creating, defined neighborhoods that have, people that have stepped up and said, I want to be a leader in this neighborhood. And then they can help get the word out about needs, wants, how to advocate on behalf of your neighborhood to the city. And so I would say that our ability to not necessarily do it for neighborhoods, but give them the tools and the resources they need to come together to make improvements to their own neighborhood. One more program under that, our grant under that, is a neighborhood improvement grant, where if you say, we've got this median and it just always looks terrible, we want to improve this, or we have a little area where we want to put a gazebo where we can have, little events, mini events and stuff that bring our neighborhood together. That's another program that has come out of that neighborhood resources. So we're really excited about that program. And I would say the Sacred Grace has been there from the beginning of that.
That's so creative and really cool. It's interesting. Like there's a prevailing sentiment, I would say, in a lot of, especially privileged and white, primarily white churches of, there's so much corruption that can happen in politics on any level. And there's, we're not going to engage in that because it's not, it's a human institution, all these kind of things. And that's prevailing in big churches and small churches and everywhere in between. And we've said this before in the podcast, 85% of churches are less than 200 people. Mm-hmm. So the vast majority in America are small. And 75% of churches only have one paid staff member. That's not even necessarily a full-time paid. Mm-hmm. So, the budgets, it costs money to do things, right? As you know, probably better than anyone. So a lot of the people who are saying, we don't really want to engage in politics because we don't want to put our hope in that. And it's like, okay, sure. As Christians, pastors don't want to put their complete hope in local politics, but the same people saying that sometimes are the same ones who are complaining that they don't have any resources to actually show love to the community, to show up and be present, even if it's just making relationships. All that to say, programs like this, where people can apply for grants and other programs that actually affect neighbors. Hey, even advocating for this sidewalk is not ADA, mm-hmm. Compliant, or like simple things like that. Right. Or things that seem simple that to vulnerable neighbors are not simple mm-hmm. at all, and they may not have the resources or the know-how to advocate for themselves. Right. It's like there are these ways built in to our neighborhoods that we can engage and show up and actually have a much greater impact on our communities. Nathan has always said, I don't have the budget to create a new school. I don't have the budget to start a bunch of programs. I have to operate in the systems that already exist. Mm-hmm. And so, and I thank you for like advocating for these kind of programs that are, benefit our especially our more vulnerable neighbors. Yeah. So, do you have any kind of advice for people looking for those kind of programs? Like, so if there's a pastor who's like, okay, I'm convinced that I need to start looking for these, how in their city do they find what's going on, or what is available for them to engage? Yeah,
I'm actually remembering it was definitely my first 6 months where a local resident who ended up running for city council invited me to a pastoral alliance. I'm not sure what it's called here in Englewood, but they kind of spoke through like, how do we change the narrative? How do we change the tone? And one of the things that he actually was actively involved in and is still going today is kind of a neighborhood rehab program where, twice a year, and now the city is partnering very closely with him, where our neighborhood resources program is actually helping get volunteers, get leaders, get projects, and he is still kind of coordinating that effort. But, to just get people out of their homes, helping people who are in need, and just really kind of making a difference in that way. But, I think another thing that's important is for, pastors, ministers, faith leaders to really connect with, leaders in the local government, in their business community, kind of leadership structure, and just have them, have coffee with them and find out what opportunities. Obviously, the pat answer is the website. And frankly, the website is a treasure trove of information about how to get involved, about all the programs, the opportunities, etc. But, I think you can flesh a lot more out when you're, and it doesn't have to be the, top leader of organizations. It can also be, okay, well, we're kind of interested in parks, so maybe we'll call the parks manager or the parks director. Maybe you're interested in youth programs, so you call the recreation manager for your local city. And so it's a lot of, ways of connecting, just personally and getting starting that relationship and then getting access to information and resources that you might not otherwise have.
Yeah. And in a smaller city, it's so much easier to have access to our city leaders than in like the city of Denver.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah.
How are small churches, because of their size, like one of the things we really want to do on this podcast is validate the importance of being small, and and so how are we uniquely positioned as a small community, to use our smallness as an asset in engaging, as opposed to just seeing it as an obstacle, right? Why being small something that's valuable?
I mean, I think it's somewhat similar to what I mentioned about the city turning on a dime because we were a smaller organization and could pivot to, serve a different population. I think, small faith communities can do the same thing. They are not kind of bound by some of the, large scale bureaucracy that many, large churches have. And they can, with one discussion on a Sunday morning, make a decision to, shift and provide a different service or, create opportunities in that way.
I so agree with that. The lack of, you don't have to have a bureaucracy because a lot of times people don't even have a staff, to, and limited volunteers, and just, we also don't have to have a building with a couple miles worth of parking lots around us. So we're actually close to neighbors, and that proximity, I think makes the relationship just way easier and more natural,
Good point.
I also am curious. We talked with Chelsea, Newnenkamp about kind of the idea or the thought of, I'm not going to engage in politics or politics are nasty on every level just because it's people grabbing for power, and it's and it's true sometimes that does happen, and there's a lot of corruption and everything. But she was saying, if you get in with the heart of public service, it's called public service for a reason, and especially on the local level, the work is not sexy, right? And so what are your thoughts on kind of, if someone were to say, well, I don't want to engage because I don't want to be, grab for power or buddy up with power. It's all corrupt,
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that I love about local government, and really when I was in grad school, I could kind of had to pick a track that I wanted to go through. And I went through local and regional because I was more impressed with the way that local government provides direct services. I mean, when you turn your water faucet on, when you drive on a street, when you walk on a sidewalk, all of those things are your local government providing services. And so I think what I love about local government is that it is less political. A pothole isn't Republican or Democrat. It's just a pothole that needs to be fixed. And so I think that it's a lot easier at the local level, the issues that we have to come together as a community to address. I think it's much easier for those to be less political, so that people that run for office don't have to be mired in, oh, this is my party's position, so this is what I need to do. And occasionally, cities get into areas where it has become political. Maybe it shouldn't have. I look at in the wake of George Floyd, a lot of our discussions around policing felt right on the edge of politics, right? Which is a little bit uncomfortable in city government where our local city council members don't run affiliated with a party, certainly not formally. And, you know, I look at some of the work that we're doing in diversity, equity, inclusion as an organization, but even that sometimes, you know, feels by nature a little political. But what I would tell people that, you know, are in the community, that are in faith communities, is that it does not have to be political and divisive. It can be true public service where, you know, you see areas of change that are needed. It's going to be hard, you know, sometimes to make those changes. You're going to have to really work at it, but ultimately it's worth it because you can see the impact that you're making. And that's what really attracted me to public service at the local level.
That's really beautiful. Yeah. I mean, the reality is you're not going to get everything you want, but why not use the channels to advocate for things that you really believe in if you can? And,
right.
you know, seeing government as not as the end all be all and not as just the complete salve to fix, you know, deep wounds, but as a tool, you know, to love our neighbors. Right. You started to bring up in the wake of George Floyd and kind of these new measures. I was curious what it's like on a local government level to advocate reform, to talk about issues that are divisive, that are actually impacting our community. You know, I know for us in Englewood, there is a lot of homelessness. There are issues related to affordable housing, like there are pretty much everywhere right now. And I know that another thing that we're talking about is restorative justice, and I've heard things like alternative policing in our city council meetings. So can you talk some about that, and then what it's like to advocate those things?
Yeah, I mean, I would say another misperception of city government is how easy it is to advocate for something in local government. I mean, if you want to lobby the state, you practically have to have a lobbyist. When you want to lobby the city government, you literally just show up to city council, or you sit down at your computer and bang out an email to your local elected officials. And I think people would be amazed to know how responsive city council members, particularly in this city, I would say more than any other city I've been in, are to those constituent concerns and needs, particularly when a group of people. So recently we had a shooting between two people who decided they weren't even from Englewood. They decided to meet at a local park to have a big fight between girlfriend, boyfriend, and the new girlfriend and boyfriends. And there were some shots fired, and a neighborhood became very concerned very quickly. They, at the following city council meeting, brought 11, 12 people and said, we want these things changed at this park. Everything from, when it closes to better lighting, just things that they saw as needs because they were very concerned. And the council, with one voice, said, city manager, staff, please start addressing these, start looking into these things. Let's have a neighborhood meeting. It brought neighborhoods together. And so I think, people would be just amazed at how easy it is to get the city to kind of move and change things. What I would say, though, is the fact that, in disadvantaged neighborhoods, that's not necessarily the case. They don't feel like they have the tools. They are not empowered. We have an area of the city called the Hill, and it's under our water tower, predominantly industrial kind of area, but it's our highest concentration of free and reduced lunch students in our school district. It's, I believe, our most predominantly Latinx community. And I wonder sometimes if there was a shooting, in their park, in their neighborhood, would they feel that level of empowerment? So another thing that we're trying to do through the Neighborhood Resources Program is bring them together, help them understand the process, ask them, for their input, and create a culture of we're going to advocate for ourselves, like another neighborhood around a more affluent park, like the example I just gave, we're able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for pastors and leaders in the small churches in the in our country, Jesus' example was sacrificing for the sake of others, not only or really at all sacrificing or advocating for his own needs. And I don't think we ever consider that a way for us to sacrifice for people, especially poor and oppressed people, can be through government. We talked about a story the other day about a neighborhood in Dallas, a wealthy neighborhood that butts up against a impoverished neighborhood, and the city was legally mandated to provide trash services to both, but they just decided not to provide to the low income kind of part of the neighborhood, because unfortunately they just knew kind of that they don't have the power to really enforce this, and it took more than one person from the privileged community to advocate on behalf of them for their sake. I mean, these issues are structural, right? And they keep compounding, and they keep putting people down, increasing the gap between the rich and the poor in a lot of cases. And can you imagine not having trash service in your neighborhood? It would just decrease your quality of life that much more. But it took the people who had the resources to even maybe drive to a city council meeting. As simple as transportation, as simple as I don't have to work 2 jobs in a day, so I can make it, and I can advocate on behalf of other people.
Absolutely.
It's a lot easier than people think. Yeah. Could you talk about alternative policing and restorative justice and what that means, and your experience, how that has been divisive or unifying or whatever that's looked like?
Yeah. I think as we look at a couple of factors that have really come to light in the last several years, and that one is increased incarceration and the fact that we are not able to jail our way into community safety. Also a rise in crime. I mean, the Denver metro area has seen pretty significant jumps in crime. And so how do you address that? One of the things that we did very soon after I arrived, in talking to the mayor at the time, was start a restorative justice program. And, with the concept really being that if we can address issues early, people that are maybe younger, that are newer, first offense, something that's not, murder or domestic abuse, et cetera, but that we can take some of those lower level crimes that if they, are penalized in a traditional kind of court system, they might, go back to their daily lives and recidivate and, commit crimes again. So we started the restorative justice program, and we're really trying to do that. And it's so far been pretty successful. And we've got to get the community used to that, educated on it. And also our police force has to really understand that by diverting people to restorative justice, you can prevent crimes in the future. It's not an immediate fix. It's what you're trying to do is change people and let them see the impact of their actions on the community, in the hopes that will change their behavior moving forward. So we're really proud of that program and the good work that it's doing. It's trained more than 50 volunteers in the community about how to have restorative conversations with people that have committed crime. On the alternate policing side, that's really focused, I would say, as much as anything, on homelessness. We have 2 co-responders and a case manager. We contract with an organization called All Health Network. And they provide those, and they are embedded into the department. And so they're going out with police officers, checking on folks, particularly those who suffer from addiction, mental health issues, as well as just individuals who are on the streets that are homeless. And the newest thing that we've just launched within the police department is our mobile response unit. So we're super excited about that. If you've ever heard of the Cahoots program up in the Northwest or the STAR program in Denver, it's very similar. We now have a big, awesome van that has clinicians that are staffing that. They, in their first day in service a few weeks ago, they had 8 calls for service where they went and provided direct services, are helping people get access to resources, helping them work a plan for, to become housed. And so we're really excited about that. Certainly other alternate policing programs that we have include our impact team, which is a way of intervening early, getting to know neighborhoods, getting to know organizations, business community, and really partnering to prevent crime from happening. And then we also have zone officers who are, it's kind of the old dots on spots. I can't remember the term, but it's where, you really concentrate heavily on hotspot policing. And so that is another form of alternate policing. But we really have focused a lot in the last 5 years on putting resources into our alternate policing programs.
That's so healthy and awesome. I mean, yeah, the statistics bear out. Putting people in jail for nonviolent offenses and slapping them with felonies increases the likelihood that they'll commit another crime by so much, and of course it's disproportionate policing in low income and communities of color, and it creates this terrible system that perpetuates itself, right? And so I think that's such a beautiful way to start looking at it. Like these are issues that can be fixed before we start punishing, and instead actually figuring out a way for people to get out. Kind of, I would say with this, just in Englewood, but also with other programs, similar programs for people who live in other cities and towns. How can a small church partner in restorative justice with a local government?
Yeah, I mean, I think volunteers are always needed. Our restorative justice program is a staff of one. So we have a restorative justice coordinator, and they're doing an awesome job in their role, but they need volunteers that can come in and help coordinate what we call circles, where we have almost like an intervention with people who have committed crime. And so we definitely need volunteers for that. I think advocacy, when those programs are, there are people who have said, we're wasting time on this, we should just be incarcerating. I think, if this is something that aligns with a congregation's values, I think advocating for those types of programs and helping educate people who may not understand them, who may not be bought into those programs, helping educate them and kind of intervening directly with people who are vocally against, as well as elected officials, and just making sure that there's a voice for people out in the community that are interested in these types of programs and services.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there resources that someone can go to right now to learn more about this that you know of?
Absolutely. And going back to the website, we have a website within our website dedicated to restorative justice, all kinds of ways to get information, to sign up, to get training and educational resources.
I love that. As we wrap up, thank you so much for being here, by the way. This was amazing. What can we be doing better? What can our small church, be doing better to come alongside you and local governments? Because one of the things I'm hearing is just kind of to start, it's like make a relationship with us, because I've heard not only from you, but from other elected officials and other city employees, encouragement and just showing up and saying that we love you and we care about you is more than you think. It does more than someone might think it does. So can you talk about that a little bit? And then what else can we be doing better?
Yeah. Well, I think that those, ways of encouraging, supporting are super important. I think with your particular faith community, I think you do that exceptionally well, and we appreciate that. I think some areas that frankly are not areas where you can improve, but I would say the city can improve in partnership, are giving back, creating more opportunities like the neighborhood rehab project, where we have a couple of days a year where we're helping a handful of homeowners or residents that are in need work on projects, plugging into those. But we really need more of that. And if that again aligns with your your congregation, I think advocating for those opportunities. I really wish we had a volunteer coordinator that could be constantly searching for projects as well as volunteers and putting the two together so that we can, be doing more good in the community for more people. I also think that, equity is something that I know the Sacred Grace values. I talked a little bit about the folks on the Hill, and just making sure as we look at, as a city, where are we providing services? Where are we upgrading infrastructure versus not? And making sure that we are advocating for people that may not always have the same voice or level of opportunity to come and advocate for themselves, I think is another area. I also think, and this is something that I think the Sacred Grace has done a good job at, but, peacemaking in terms of contentious issues, particularly when I got here and it was so divisive. I think there were a lot of voices from the Sacred Grace that were really there with the goal of peacemaking. But I think since, things have calmed down, I think everybody that was more intentional about that 3 years ago has kind of said, "Oh, things are good. We're done." Whereas there are still many contentious issues within the community and many opportunities for positive voices to be heard at city council, to be heard at public hearings, to be heard at community and neighborhood meetings, and just being intentional about providing those voices. And maybe you're there to say, you need to do this better, city government, but to also say, but we acknowledge and recognize the effort, the intent, and what's trying to be done here. So I would say advocate for community outreach, be peacemakers, and really pursue and push the city to make sure that we are providing services equitably.
That's amazing. That's so good. Yeah, being peacemakers. So know what's going on in your community. It's not that hard because of the internet, because of city council meetings. There are resources at your disposal, and also like partner. Let's as small church people partner and be creative with our city leaders. Right? Collaboration is always better than trying to figure things out on your own.
Absolutely.
Anything else that you wanted to talk about or say?
No, just appreciate the opportunity to come on. It's been fun.
Yeah, thanks so much, Shawn. We love you a lot, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you.
All righty.
Parish Podcast is a production of Vineworks Film Company. The executive producer is Nathan Hoag. This episode was produced, edited, and hosted by Canaan Hurst. Graphic design and set design by Erica Kriesel. Find us on social media at Parish Podcast. Remember to subscribe and rate this podcast wherever you listen. This video podcast has been made possible by the generous support of the Sacred Grace, an incubator and accelerator that's cultivating leaders to take spiritual and social responsibility for their neighbors and neighborhoods. For more information, visit thesacredgrace.com.